You expect me to talk?
No, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die.
Written by Tom Mankiewicz and once again directed by Guy Hamilton, 1973's Live and Let Die. This was a phenomenal return for the franchise as well as for the character of Bond. In 1971, Sean Connery did his last film, which was Diamonds Are Forever, and Roger Moore took over in the role of Bond. Funny fact, Sean Connery himself suggested Moore for the role. I think that's pretty interesting. And you know, those are always the most exciting times in Bond history, when there's a transition from one actor to another. Because usually it's not only the actor who changes, it's also the tone of the films. Because with every actor, with every transition from one actor to another, a new era of some kind starts. Because they adapt to the times in which the films are made. Bond films are always a reflection of the times in which they were made, and they adapt to the new actor. Of course, there's a formula which always stays the same. There's a formula for the films, some tropes you always get. Familiar things they keep in there, but they change the tone of the films every now and then. Sometimes they go for a little more humor, sometimes they get a little darker and so on. They include pop cultural things from the times, just to stay relevant and refreshing and interesting and exciting. And I think that's a formula for long-time success. That's what makes this film so successful over decades, because they always change some things, they always stay relevant, they never just copy and paste. And I love this about the films. Those are always the most exciting times, when they're changing the direction of the films, changing the tone of the films, and changing the actor. And it's always refreshing and exciting, you know, to look at. And you know, the same goes for the actor. There's also the same thing as with the movies in general. There's the general formula, the usual tropes, and you always get them. So familiar things, character tropes, and they always somehow stay true to Ian Fleming. Not in every aspect of the character, but in many of those. And I love this about the films. But they don't want to just copy and paste. They don't want to just change the face and keep the rest the same. Yet they change Bond a little bit. Some of his habits, for example, with Roger Moore, they adapted to his charms. They ramped up his British snobism and his charms and his dry sense of humor. And the way he moves is very different. He's not, you know, as rough as Connery was, especially in the fight scenes. He moves very slowly, and there's not a single hair out of place, for example. And yeah, a lot of very, very dry sense of humor. And also little habits Bond has, they changed. He's not having his usual vodka martini, for example. Because they wanted to, you know, make things a little different. So it's not just a copy of his predecessor. He's smoking a big cigar that's also different. Sean Connery smoked cigarettes. So they changed a lot of little things here and there to separate Roger Moore's Bond from Connery's Bonds. And it was very successful. I mean, replacing an actor, it's always hard to do, because Connery did a lot of films and people of course loved him, and I think he was the best Bond to this day. But it was a very successful transition, and I think they did a phenomenal job, and it was a phenomenal return for the character. And Roger Moore did a great job. He was already a known actor. He played a TV detective called Simon Templar. And there were a lot of similarities from this character to Bond. So I think that was, you know, one of the reasons why they considered him for the role back in the day. And also, as I said, Connery himself suggested him. I think that's interesting. And the tone of the film is always, they took a lot of pop cultural things from the time into the film. There was blaxploitation films in the early 70s were a thing. So that was an influence, of course. Some say it was racist and stuff like that. Yeah, but I don't want to engage in this conversation, to be honest, completely honest with you. Um, yeah, I'm a big fan of the novel, and there's a lot of racism in there. But this, yeah, it's of its time, you know. It was a different time, and I was never a fan of censoring those books, by the way. And you can have a conversation about those things because of course, it's relevant. But I don't want to let this overshadow the joy that I have with this film. And I have a lot of joy. I love this film. I think it's one of the best Bond films, and I think it's maybe Roger Moore's best film. I'm not 100% sure about this, but of course, but for sure in one of the top three Roger Moore films. I love Octopussy, so yeah, Octopussy always battles with Live and Let Die. Yeah, so Roger Moore looks great. There's Jane Seymour as the Bond girl, and she's lovely. She's a little, childlike. Maybe it's because I'm getting older, but she plays solitaire, and she looks beautiful. She looks stunning, and she's she's likable in because of her childlike presence, I think. Yeah, she's iconic as a Bond girl. I like her more than I liked every Bond girl from the Connery films, to be honest with you. Was never the biggest fan of Ursula Andress, was never the biggest thing, a fan of Pussy Galore, and all of those iconic girls. I wasn't the biggest fan, I don't know why, but I'm a big fan of hers. And then there's Japhet Kotto playing our villain, Dr. Kananga. He's in fact playing a double role. He plays this street drug dealer, this messed up drug dealer called Mr. Big, who's selling drugs in the streets of New York City. And at the same time, he plays Dr. Kananga, who's very different, who's a Caribbean diplomat, very sophisticated the way he talks, always wearing the best suits, never something out of place. And that's in fact the same person, because Dr. Kananga is a high-scale drug dealer. He uses his diplomat status to get drugs to the US, and in the role of Mr. Big, he's selling those drugs. And so he created this whole cartel with very interesting story, I think. Of course, drug crimes were a theme of its time. That was a thing in the early 70s. And I think Japhet Kotto plays this double role brilliantly because, yeah, Mr. Big is very street and Kananga is very sophisticated, and the way they dress very differently, and Mr. Big is kind of a pimp, and Kananga is like a shadow version of Bond. He's like the dark version of Bond, and I've seen some documentary where someone, sadly I forgot who it was, talked about the fact that Kananga wanted to be Bond. He was kind of jealous of Bond, and that's a factor, that drives him to do harm to Bond, not only because, he's endangering his organization, but also because of personal reasons. Because he was jealous of him and he wanted to be like Bond. And he respected him a lot. And because, Bond takes Solitaire of him. Because Solitaire, Kananga had some relationship with her mother, and he keeps Solitaire as her mistress of some sorts. And she's also doing this tarot cards. And he, comes from a culture where they seem to believe in those things, and so she's reading him the cards all the time. I love those scenes, someone's coming over the water and stuff like that. I think that's amazing. And Bond takes Solitaire from him, takes his girl, and that's another reason, a personal reason for Kananga to kill Bond. And I love the whole rivalry between those two. I love this chemistry. It's so exciting, and yeah, I love it. I think he's one of the greatest villains in the series. So, and then there's this whole subplot with the voodoo thing. We got our first henchman in with Baron Samedi, who's a some voodoo priest or something. It's just a henchman, playing a role to scare people because they create this whole myth. Kananga has his factory where he's producing his drugs and where he's doing all of those things. It's on an island, hidden in a cave, and he's using the whole voodoo thing to scare people away from this island so they don't discover what's going on there. And he does it very successfully and creates this whole myth around it, with voodoo curses and stuff like that, and it gets pretty dark at times, and I love those visuals. I love those people, how they are dressed, on this voodoo priest, and the music gets very dark, and they use the snake, who kills the people, and I in a voodoo ceremony and stuff like that. I love all of those things. I think it's a very interesting contrast to the 70s New York thing, because those locations are interesting because they are so different. They shot in New York City, and New York in the 70s was a mess, let's be honest. It looks like, a war zone, I think. I've seen some documentary about 70s New York, and I was shocked what was going on there. As a European living in the middle of Europe, I cannot imagine stuff like that. It's just a interesting thing. And of course, and then there's the Caribbean, and very different. The whole island vibe and vacation vibe, and it goes back to Dr. No a little bit because they return to Jamaica. And yeah, of course, Jamaica is an important location for Bond because that's where the character was created at. Ian Fleming wrote all of those novels in his house in Jamaica. GoldenEye it was called, just like the film. And yeah, it's always nice to see Bond return to Jamaica. That was a thing I loved about No Time to Die. Because they returned for the first time in decades. And yeah, I love those Jamaica scenes, and I love those vibes and those visuals. And yeah, I love the dark voodoo thing. That looks so amazing. And yeah, it's pretty scary, I think. I think it's pretty scary. And yeah, as I said, interesting contrast to the New York scenes. So we have an amazing villain, and then there's another great henchman with Teehee. He got his claw, like all of the henchmen back in the days, they needed something like, their teeth or the heads or something to separate them from other henchmen. And I think it's very entertaining. There's this amazing scene. It's one of my favorites in the film, where he wants to feed Bond to the crocodiles, and they're having a small talk conversation, pretty nice, and he's slowly guiding Bond to this small island which is surrounded by crocodiles. And there's a little bridge, but as soon as Bond arrives at this little island, he's pulling away the bridge, so Bond is trapped on this little island surrounded by crocodiles. And I love this scene, and how much he enjoys this whole thing, because Bond doesn't realize what's going on until it's too late. And he really enjoys the whole thing, and I love this scene. It's one of my favorites. Great stunt work, by the way, because Bond escapes running over the crocodiles, and those were real crocodiles, and this was a real guy running over. It's what you see is what you get again. That was a real guy running over the crocodiles, and he even got hurt by one of those crocodiles. So very interesting. And there's another great scene with T at the train, and I love train scenes in Bond films. It's a trope, it goes back to Fleming, because Fleming always thought of trains as something dangerous. And he always said nothing good happens at trains and stuff like that. He had he had a thing with trains. So every now and then, like there are ski chases or car chases, there are train fights in Bond films, and I love all of those. And there's a great one with Teehee, where he surprises Bond in the night, and yeah, they're fighting, and he's throwing him out of the window, and I love all of those things. So we have amazing villains in this film, really charismatic villains. We have a great Bond girl. We have very interesting locations, from dirty streets of New York to exotic Caribbean voodoo feel. Very great. And then there's the music, the title track from Paul and Linda McCartney, to be fair, I guess. And that's one of the best. It's one of the best title sequences ever in Bond. I think it was the best to this day. No, it was the best at its time. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. I think it looks way more beautiful than all of the title sequences of the Connery films. I love the colors and the visuals, and the song it's such a unique track. It's such a unique song. It's a rock song, but at the same time it's very Bond, and there are melancholic elements and there are aggressive elements, and it switches between those things, and it's still to this day a very good song, and I listen to it a lot, and yeah, one of the most memorable, I think. And yeah, I wasn't ever the biggest fan of the action in this film, I have to admit. No, not at all. There's this boat chase. It goes on very long, and in parts without any music and stuff. And yeah, it feels strange to me. And I was never a fan of this. And wasn't this long boat chase in the film, it would be one of my favorites. But this chase goes on for, I don't know, 15 minutes or something like that. And it's done like a strange 70s comedy. There's Sheriff Pepper in there, who I loved as a child, and I still think he's very funny, and yeah, I still enjoy his presence. But yeah, it's strange how the thing is edited, and yeah, it goes on very long. I don't get it. I never got it. I don't know. I don't like this chase. I don't like the whole car chase with the plane. I think that's not very exciting. That's also a little too yeah, it feels like some 70s Burt Reynolds comedy or something like that. Yeah, so I don't like the action in the film. Yeah, Roger Moore is not great in the fight scenes and stuff like that. But nevertheless, I am able to overlook those things. I'm not a big fan, but I'm a fan of so many things in this film. I'm a fan of, yeah, the villain, the Bond girl, there's great dialogue between Bond and Kananga. And one of my favorite scene in the film is the final confrontation of those two. Not exactly the fight when they're in the water, but Kananga trying to feed Bond to the sharks. That's dark. That's very dark, and he enjoys every second of it. And he wants this to happen very slowly, very slowly. He's just giving him a cut, and he has this evil grin on his face. So he enjoys every second of this, and he's telling his henchman to slow the whole process down because they're in no hurry, and and he really wants to watch Bond getting eaten by those sharks, Bond and Solitaire, and taking his revenge on those two because she betrayed him, and taking revenge on Bond because he somehow wants to be Bond. And this is an amazing scene. I love this, and Bond uses his watch to get out of this, and yeah, big fan of this. I love the gadgets, I love the watches, and the little fight before they are falling into the water is amazing, because Kananga has a knife, and that's so much more interesting, a knife fight between two guys, and only one of them has a knife. So that's way more interesting than shooting around all the time. And how Kananga enjoys this, you know, how he moves the knife, and his evil grin on his face, his insane look on his face. This is one of the most enjoyable things in Bond history. I love, you know, a good confrontation between Bond and our villain. That's the most important thing for me in the Bond films. The chemistry between the villain and Bond, and the dialogue between those two, and the confrontation between those two. That's my main. Yeah, that's what I love most about these films, and they did a great job with this one. So yeah, it's an amazing film. I hope I was able to convince some of you to rewatch it if you haven't seen it in a while, and enjoy it. It's timeless. Yeah, it's of its time, but it still works today. It's fast paced and it's entertaining, and yeah, has great characters, great music, great locations, great action, great set pieces, like almost all of the Bond films have. So is there anything to mention, anything I forgot? I don't think so. Yeah, so thank you for watching. Love you, love the Bond community, and see you very soon.